didn't tell me about.
We can probably just do it ourselves.
Okay.
That's you.
Yeah.
And you're gonna go?
I'll just show you. I'm not sure.
That one's mine, so I think we need to start with
We're going to be
Professor
starting.
King.
Professor King.
No, I'm not sure.
Abisawa, Tara, could you do me an extra favor, please? Just help to load these, make sure you have the right ones up. The first one is Professor King. On to the Monday afternoon session of plenary. This first day of the Diaspora Conference. The theme this afternoon is transforming the self-image, and we have three wonderful, diverse panelists who will present for 10 to 15 minutes this afternoon, after which we will have cogent, orderly, and insightful comments and questions from your beautiful and erudite audience. The first presenter, we got some very strict rules and regulations circulated this morning from the conference secretariat, which said to us that we ought not to read the bios of the presenters, which is a shame because it takes some time, but they are in the booklet. I hope everybody has one. So I'll get straight to it and I'll follow instructions for once in my life. And so the first presenter this afternoon, welcome, sir. Welcome, sir. I think I'm going to go to the right. Okay, so Guyanese-born Karen King Arabisala. Is that right? Excellent. I've been trying to pronounce this all afternoon. She's a professor at the University of Lagos in Nigeria, and she will be presenting this afternoon a case study of Emily Danticat's Children of the Sea and Earl Lewis's Jobel of America. One is a Haitian writer, the other one is Trinidad. Please warmly welcome Professor Arabisala.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here, and I'll just go straight to the paper. The image of the Caribbean diaspora is often pejorative, connoting displacement, a scattering of peoples whose negative historical legacy, emphasized by the Atlantic slave trade, indentured labor, colonialism, and neocolonialism, has consigned the region and its peoples to migratory status, expressing a longing to connect with a physical source, be it Africa, Asia, Europe, in order to arrive at the location of wholeness they so much crave. It can be argued that this image expresses the reality of the Caribbean experience. Indeed, this perceived reality gains credence in Caribbean literary fiction, the imagination of the writers revealing a diaspora angst, a quest to come home to itself and to its own authentic identity. Danticat's short story, Children of the Sea, and Earl Lovelace's Jobel and America reveal how this aforedescribed image can be transformed and be re-represented in and by the imagination, arguably the first port of call in transcending that negative, deracinated image which Caribbean peoples often confront. Now, image is here perceived as being located in the physical realm, reality, impacting on imagination, the realm of the psyche, the spirit. More often than not, image is dominant in this relationship, governing and imprisoning imagination to its detriment. Accordingly, this paper focuses primarily on the relationship between these two locations of image, physical reality, and imagination, psyche, spirit, each at war with the other in a bid to gain supremacy and inform the lives and inner lives of the protagonists, the Caribbean diaspora. Image, a seemingly impregnable bulwark, preventing imagination from realizing its full potential as a positive, transforming force. So both stories feature imaged and imaginary locations. Dandicat's Children of the Sea drawing its reference point from the locations of past and present history of the Caribbean diaspora, emphasizing the role of the Atlantic slave trade, imaged and imagined in the lives of its Haitian protagonists. The male protagonist flees from Haiti with other Haitians to America by boat. On the boat, he writes letters to the girlfriend who he has left behind with her family, she herself writing letters informing him of her circumstances in Haiti. Yet, despite their different locations on sea and land, they are both imprisoned by the negative reality of Haiti, which has been imaged in their psyches, each longing not so much to inhabit a new geographical location, but a location of freedom. The girl, locked up in fear with her family, cannot escape the violence of the soldiers' bullets from entering her imagination, and the boy is imprisoned by the prejudicial violence he encounters on the boat. In fact, he thinks of Africa, and he believes that if the boat actually went to Africa, that if he arrived there, Africans would reject them. So he enters another boat in his journey, in his imagination, journeys to Africa, believing that his ancestors would treat him in the same way as the Haitian soldiers. And it becomes apparent that like his enslaved African ancestors, he is journeying from one form of violence, prejudice, and subjugation to another, imprisoned by the very forces and circumstances from which he has seemingly fled. Each protagonist, for example, notes the sexual violence of the Haitian soldiers, forcing sons to sleep with mothers and daughters with their fathers, a brutalization which is evident in their slave history, where white slaveholders similarly dehumanized their slaves. Their violent history repeats itself in another guise, another form of slavery, which though perpetrated by different races, is essentially the same. It is an image, not so much of Haitian or European brutality, but of human brutality. In fact, both protagonists are undergoing an educative process, searching for something that could be of use to them on the journey. That's the quote. That something is the imagination, evident when in the girl's case, hiding in the latrine with her family, she overhears soldiers brutalizing her neighbor, Madame Roger, as they question her as to the whereabouts of her son, who they have already killed. Madame Roger screams, "You killed him already! We buried his head! You can't kill him twice!" In effect, the relationship between image and imagination of the Caribbean diaspora is encapsulated by her words. For both the Haitian soldiers in time present and the slaveholders in time past can only succeed in enslaving others if they can kill twice. Both image, reality, and imagination, psyche, soul. Now what is the soul? To Ghazali, the soul, the heart, imagination, memory, spirit are one. And this term, he perceives the location of all of these as the heart. The heart and the soul are seen as similar, and the soul itself is a subtle entity which is the true reality of a human being, as is the self, an essence of a human being. In this regard, then, the protagonists are journeying to the location of the soul, their imagination. And this is effected through a nakeding process whereby the values aligned with physical and psychological encumbrances are jettisoned. They locate their souls by privileging the imagination, writing letters to an invisible presence, by marrying their imaginations, by focusing on shared values like the keeping of promises, choosing not who to marry but what to marry, image or imagination, and they choose the latter, following the directives of an aphysical voice which guides them to the location of the soul, a voice which speaks through nature, the natural world, and banyan trees and butterflies. In short, they access a language of the imagination, a resurrection from the death and imprisonment of image, especially with regard to the sea, which at first is negatively imaged and imagined, but they personalize it, they individualize it, they people it with their love relationship. And the sea, which in a sense has led to their enslavement both in Haiti and in the historical location of the Atlantic slave trade, is viewed as an end, which they saw first as an endless image of imprisonment, now becomes an image of freedom. The sea is endless, like their love for each other, because they have imaginatively transformed it as their own created location, in spite of the boy's physical death, in spite of the girl's psychological knowledge of his death at the story's conclusion. For Jobel and America, it is to the psyche of the Caribbean diaspora that Earl Lovelace specifically directs his attention in his short story, Jobel and America, wherein Jobel is so imprisoned by the value systems imaged on American TV that he believes his own country, Trinidad, and very self, to be comparatively lacking in worth, so that his one desire is to go to America. As relayed through the TV, America is imaged and imagined as a location of wealth, recreation, where pleasure and its pursuit is continuous. Jobel is captivated by the games he views with America's competitive lifestyle and is imprisoned by its values. He realizes the necessary funds to journey to America by gambling, and he places his money on a single card, the Jack, and wins a great deal of money. So it would appear that image has won in this war between image and imagination, because Jobel acquires wealth, the wealth with which he associates with America, he becomes a hero, and so on. But the Jack, his favorite card with which he wins, is in fact a Western image of subservience. As early as the mid-16th century, the card was known in England as the knave, meaning a male servant of royalty. The implication being that Jobel, the Caribbean diaspora, has unwittingly aligned himself with an imaged Western value system in which he is the subservient other. Indeed, image so governs Jobel's imagination that he speaks Yankee, convinced that he has entered the thought process of Americans and, as a result, can enter their image location. Though unconscious of the empowering force of his mindset, Jobel is in fact beginning the process of entering the world of the imagination, liberating himself from the imaged imprisoning value systems relating to the English language with its associations of his slavery and colonized history, allowing him to perceive it not as a language of subjugation which he is forced to speak, but one which is associated with entering the mindsets of variant speakers of that language. Jobel is, however, ignorant of this unique linguistic identity and mindset, but he is nevertheless guided by the voice of the Trinidadian English-speaking narrator, and he learns two sets of linguistic or language values. The numerical commercial value attributed to the West, America, which can be regarded as an image currency and a currency of the imagination. The value attributed to friends, community, and family, which Jobel will have to be made conscious of. Use this currency or language value system to get to the location of the imagination. This location is emphasized in his relationship with Alicia. The couple imagine a location in which their dreams can be realized. And when Jobel arrives at Puerto Rico airport en route to America, the war between image and imagination reaches its apogee. For awaiting interrogation from immigration officials at the airport in his image persona as an American Vietnam veteran, Jobel is actually a war veteran, not for America, but for himself, Alicia, and his Trinidadian community. Each location is juxtaposed in his thoughts. Finally, he looks at the immigration officials. He sees them as squirrel face and iron jaw, thereby changing, using his imagination to turn them into images. And he's asked to recite the alphabet. I think this is actually a pathetic part of the story, but anyway, he's asked to recite the alphabet, and he deliberately mispronounces the last letter of the alphabet. Instead of saying Z, he says Z, and he's caught. But even though he is arrested for impersonation, Jobel feels free, free of the imaged America, which has lured him into another form of imprisoned awe and slavery. Finally, thus we see a movement from image to imagination, an empowering decision on Jobel's part to choose to live by his own values. He becomes not an object of history, but a creator of his own history. Thus, in both these stories, the imagination triumphs over image. The protagonists conquer their past and present history to which they have been subjected by creating a new world for themselves. The writers revealing an ideological source and channel through which conception and perception are re-imaged and reimagined. Once this is effected, the Caribbean diaspora can move forward as individuals, as a group which can see itself as positively unified, transcend a history which has deemed them often as negative, migrant, other, both to themselves and to each other and the world. In effect, they have fought not so much nature, but the nature of human nature and triumph. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Professor Absala. Both keeping perfectly on time and for a very insightful paper, which I'm sure we'll have some discussion on after the presentations completed. The next presenter is the third rose among the handout. Fidel Captain is a Queen's College scholar and alumni of Queen's College, and he works at Stout Community College in the British Virgin Islands. His presentation is entitled "A Robust and Visionary Post-Secondary Education Policy Can Contribute to the Economic and Social Development of Guyana in the Knowledge-Based Economy of the 21st Century." I had to read that.
Yes, it's supposed to be short. I don't know how they got the long one.
Just at this hour of the afternoon, I'm keeping myself awake. Nothing to do with it.
Yes.
Please, sir, go ahead.
I will try my best to keep you awake also. Thank you for the introduction. Now, my presentation really is based on a trend now that is referred to as education for development. As you are aware, we are living in the 21st century and the economy is knowledge-based. And what I am proposing for Guyana is an education for development policy that focuses, or within the context of the diaspora, because we've lost a lot of our members through migration. We can also now try to reverse that trend, whereby we have a positive net migration, and then use that now to develop our country both economically and socially. Now, what it is based on is the fact that the human resource is one of the most vital in the knowledge-based economy of the 21st century. And what I'm proposing is policy built around using this resource as a thrust for development. At the end of the presentation of my research, what I produce some recommendations that I hope can form the framework of post-secondary education policy, as I said, that can be used as a tool for economic and social development. Now, what is the role of government in post-secondary education development policy? Now, usually there's a ministry or department that's responsible for education, and all policy relating to education usually emanates from this ministry or this department. In the case of Guyana, there's a Ministry of Education that deals with all education policy from nursery straight up to tertiary. The minister just gave a presentation on that. And within that, what we find is that there are two policies that are dominant at this present moment in Guyana. There's another, there was recently concluded research. I think there was a paper that was produced, but I wasn't able to follow up on it, where I did make some recommendations regarding what should be in the policy going forward. The two policies are Education for Sustainable Development and the Education Sector Plan 2014-2018. Now, it is worthy of note that in both of these plans there is very little, if any, mention of specific post-secondary education plans or plans for making education a part of the national development strategy. I was very tempted to ask the minister just now in her presentation when she presented the vision. Again, in that vision, there's nothing speaking to using education as a tool for national development. And this is something I think that is very important and that we need to look at very closely going forward. In Malaysia, there is a national higher education strategy. There's a gentleman by the name of Mahathir who presented a vision in 1996, a Vision 2020 for Malaysia. And they are well on the road. They're a bit short, but at least there was a vision 20 years ago. And what I'm suggesting is that we have a similar vision at this point in time going forward, because you know the talk now is about having the resources, financial resources now through oil being made available to us. Now, migration has had a very detrimental effect on post-secondary education. As a matter of fact, it has a very detrimental effect on the Guyanese society as a whole. Some numbers that I got really point to what I refer to as a catastrophic brain drain between 1985 and 2015. The numbers are here only between 1985 and 2000, but I don't suspect they're much different. What it really points to is about 20% of our skilled labor force leaving. That is really 1 in 5 persons leaving, skilled labor. Those with tertiary education, it's even higher, it's 90% or thereabouts. Now, if you actually think about it, if you're losing 9 out of 10 of your best educated people, what really does that say to the society and to really what is left to govern that society? I really wouldn't get into the politics, but you can use your imagination where 9 of your 10 best educated people are leaving and 1 in 5 of your most skilled people are leaving. And obviously that detrimental effect is felt in post-secondary education. I am sorry. Oh. Okay, could someone please? Yeah, I pressed the wrong button. I'm updating it on my laptop, but I wasn't on the screen. I'm sorry about that. Getting a bit carried away in the presentation. Thank you. Is it that one? Okay, that's forward, forward, forward. Yes, I can. Okay. Right. This was what I was just talking about in terms of the numbers. 9 in 10 of our tertiary educated persons and 1 in 5 of our skilled persons migrating, and the effect that it has on the society as a whole and in development. And with regards to post-secondary education, many of you know a lot of our educators have left for the Caribbean, North America, Europe, and even Africa. Guyanese have contributed tremendously to African development. One of the countries I'm actually looking at as a model is Botswana, where they've used migration, especially of educators, to a positive effect to turn around their education system. As a matter of fact, the whole economy and the outlook for Botswana in the last decade has been turned around. They've used migration to a positive effect. The University of Guyana is suffering. The GTI and other institutions are also suffering as a result of migration. Now, what I actually did was I did an analysis within the following categories with regards to what a policy should look like regarding post-secondary education for development. And the categories that I looked at were what are the objectives of the policy, the environment within which the policy will operate, boundaries and limits for the policy, and symmetrical issues. And at the end of this, what I have are a list of recommendations. The paper actually goes into the details of the analysis. I wouldn't here. What I will do is just discuss the recommendations that I would like to make regarding that. Now, first and foremost, vision. Vision is very important, and it's something that I must say that I do find lacking a lot of, but then when 9 of 10 of your most educated people leave, their vision leaves with them. So what we need is a clear vision as to where we need to be, and that's why I looked at Malaysia, where Mahathir in 1996 had a clear vision of where he wanted Malaysia to be in 2020. They're not there, but they're very far along the road of where they need to be. That vision would include a framework for the advancement of post-secondary education or generally education as a tool for national and social development. What that policy will also do is safeguard our economic development by broadening the intellectual base. Again, migration has had an effect on this, and also the economy of the 21st century necessitates that we have a broad intellectual base. What we also need to do is guarantee quality, affordable post-secondary education that is equally available and affordable to Guyanese. And we need to facilitate the transition between high school and skilled employment, or high school and the university. Minister Cathy Hughes, I have spoken with her on one occasion, is making an effort in that regard. She has started some ICT programs that will bridge the gap, giving young people the skills they need to be functional in the 21st century workplace, and I think I lauded her on that earlier, but we need more of this, and it needs to be at a national level, at a policy level. This is what I would recommend. Further, Such a policy would need to facilitate private sector education entrepreneurship while protecting the citizens from something that is known as education commodification, which I see creeping in with the number of universities that are popping up in Guyana. We need to be very, very careful about education commodification, and there needs to be rigid policies in place to mitigate the risk that arises out of that. Also, the policy would need to be cognizant of the public interest that post-secondary education serves. We need to be cognizant of the role of the knowledge base of the human resource in the 21st century economy, cognizant of ethical issues affecting, cognizant of migration issues, and we also need to be cognizant of the resources that are available from the diaspora and to make efforts to use these resources to improve and enhance post-secondary education in Guyana. Now, what is also important within the context of this conference is we need to create an environment to attract and retain qualified post-secondary educators through migrant and remigrant post-secondary educator incentives. I did mention previously the case of Botswana and how their policies and their incentives both attracted migrants, migrant educators and remigrants, and has helped to put their country really at the forefront of Africa as a model for development. I think that we should do the same. The minister, I think Minister Patterson earlier was mentioning that we need to take things into consideration, such as if you within the context here, the salary is 4,000, take home is 3,000 US. But I would remind the minister that Mr. Main told me something a long time ago, about 20, 25 years ago. He said, if you pay peanuts, you will get monkey business. Okay? So we need to be aware of that. Yes? And people need to be rewarded for their skills, their knowledge, and their effort. Okay? So we need to create that environment to attract and to retain our qualified migrants. And we need also to monitor quality control. I'm a sucker for quality control. There's an accreditation council that has been set up recently. They're making steps to attract that. They're making steps to ensure that we're in line with international standards in terms of accreditation. Again, I praise the ministry for this. Now, finally, in conclusion, what I'm saying is this. We need a sound and prudent post-secondary education policy that can be used as a tool for economic and social development. And such a policy can lead to the advancement of the intellectual skill set of the Guyanese people, although we've lost a lot of those through migration. It's the only thing really, in my belief, that can lift us as a people out of poverty, right? The advocates and the academics state that this will lead to a larger middle class, and a broader middle class is better for the economy. Such a policy would ensure that we have quality and affordable secondary education. We need to promote education entrepreneurship, and the policy would be cognizant of migration issues and also the resources that are available from the diaspora, and would make these resources not available but use them in a way to benefit us and the economy. I thank you. I'm sorry if I went over by a few minutes. Just that time? Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fidel Captain. Food for thought. And this afternoon, the final panelist is not Guyanese, but I think she is representing someone who we believe we have conferred honorary Guyanese status on. That's His Excellency, the Ambassador, who's been very kind to the University of Guyana. This is the second expert he has provided in less than 3 months for the university, in the person of Ms. Tania Miranda of the Institute of Mexican Living Abroad in Mexico City. She is a graduate of UCLA, not USCLA, major difference. And we are very happy to welcome her this afternoon, all the way from Mexico, as she presents the outlook of the 12 years of implementation of the global MX network of skilled migrants. Please warmly welcome Tanya.
Thank you. Hi everyone, how you all doing? I'm here on behalf of the IME, which is the Institute for Mexicans Abroad, and we are part of the Foreign Ministry of Mexico. And we are very honored to be here, so thank you to the University of Guyana for inviting us. We're here to present and talk a little bit about our experience with our high-skilled diaspora around the world. So I hope that it seems interesting to all of you. Let me start by picturing a little bit of the background of the Mexican migration around the world. Oh, thank you. We have a little bit above 12 million Mexican born spread around the world, but out of that, 12 million exactly reside in the United States, and the other 300,000 live in different countries, mainly Germany, Spain, Canada, Guatemala, and a few other countries, also in Asia and Oceania. As you can see, this is a very particular situation because we also have around 25 million Mexicans from second and third generation living in the United States, and that would mean that around 10% of the U.S. population is of either Mexican descent or Mexican born. This is also a map that talks specifically about the high-skilled immigration around the world, specifically to OECD nations. And you can see that Mexico has a high-skill immigration rate from between 5 to 10%. There are very few countries that have more than 20% of their high-skilled living abroad. Most of those are in Africa and also in South America, including Guyana, of course. Specifically about the Mexican high-skilled diaspora, just to give you an idea of where we are, we have around 900,000 living in America. Of course, more than 90% of those living in the United States. We have around 60,000 living in Europe and around 10,000 living in Asia and Oceania. According to OECD data, I found that Mexico's immigration rate, general immigration rate is about 12%, and the high-scale immigration rate is half of that, so 6%. In 2016, we had 26,000 Mexicans studying a higher education degree in around the world. We had 1,500 studying a master's degree and around 700 studying a PhD. Out of the numbers, we have a little bit more than 1 million high-skilled Mexicans living outside of the nation's borders. I also wanted to show this map because it talks about the percentage of your skilled workers living outside of the nation's borders, which is very akin to what Mr. Fidel was talking about, because you can see Guyana up there with almost 90% of its high-skilled workers living abroad. Mexico is way over there on the left. We have around 120 million inhabitants, and we have around 1 out of 5 university-educated workers living abroad, which is also very significant. And specifically about our high-skilled workers living in the United States, we've been seeing a radical change since the early 2000s. You can see on the graph on the left, the line on top, the light gray, shows the non-skilled or the unskilled workers, Mexican workers residing in the United States. And you can see that there was a steep increase from 1990 to the 2000s, and then the rate of increase kind of slowed down until the 2010, and then it kind of plateaued and it started going down after that. Unfortunately, I couldn't get more recent data. And then talking about the skilled workers, which is the black one on below on the graph, you can see that it slightly went up from 1990 to the 2000s, and then we saw a very sharp increase after that until now, and it is still going up. According to the Center for Global Development, there are two main reasons for this change, and one of it was that people were leaving Mexico towards the United States with higher education degrees, and they had better access to higher education at home, so they were leaving more prepared towards the United States. And this is partly explained because they were getting good education at home, but they were not getting high-paid jobs or good job opportunities at home, so they were searching for them outside. And the second reason is that they were finding also better opportunities in the United States to get higher education. So either it was because of a change in laws in the United States, or because they simply had been there since they were kids, and it just meant that they had better access to university than our Mexicans had before. So as our high-skilled population outside of Mexico increased, the foreign ministry started looking at them, right? Because I think I did mention it on the first slides, but out of the 12 million people, Mexican-born living in the United States, about half of that population, about 5.8 million, is undocumented. So this is a very, very vulnerable population that has been the target of the public policy of the Mexican government historically, because they need protection, because they need to be provided with documents, they need to be provided with birth certificates, with housing, etc. And we sadly forgot about this high-skilled diaspora that we had abroad. And as it grew, we realized that we were forgiving, and this was forgone talent from Mexico. And the fact that we were not engaging with them, it meant that we were losing very good talent abroad. And that's when the rhetoric about brain drain and everything that you were mentioning started to be talked about in Mexico. And the Foreign Relations Ministry in Mexico recommended to the IME, the Institute for Mexicans Abroad, to enact some sort of policy that targeted specifically the high skill. It all started with people in a group of Mexicans living in Boston, another one in Silicon Valley, and another one in Houston. And the IME started this project called the Global Mexican Network, which was the Red Global MX. This started in 2005, and the whole point of it was to change the rhetoric of brain drain to this entire concept of circulation of knowledge. So like I mentioned, we started the Red Global with the objective of creating projects that could empower our people from the outside towards Mexico. We realized that this was a group of people that were probably not coming back. And there's nothing wrong with that. They had their families there, they created a life abroad. And we accepted the fact, but we realized we needed to give them an opportunity and a way to contribute to Mexico from wherever they were. And the whole point of La Red Global was for them to be able to form a group in whatever city they were, formed by high-skilled Mexicans. So it is a civil society organization. It is not a government organization. And each group created their own statutes, their own internal structure, their own objectives, mission, vision, whatnot. And what the government did, what we did at IME, is simply to provide connections to other Mexicans living in their cities. We provided connections to institutions, technology, and entrepreneurship, you mentioned it, in Mexico, so that they could develop projects that were of their interest, but that could also further development in Mexico. So every one of these groups are called chapters. Right now we have 56 chapters around the world. You can see we have 33 in the Americas, we have 7 in Asia Pacific, and 17 in Europe. And they're all very distinct chapters. They all have their the projects in a specific sector, right? And we work particularly in those 4 fundamental pillars that you can see on the left. And at IME, we procure those synergies, and we also provide a way to know amongst each other. So we try to connect them once a year, at least in Mexico. We provide those ways to get together and talk about shared practices, about the projects that they're doing. And we also try to give them like a center stage to make them part of the development in Mexico. Lastly, and it's a very fundamental part of the project, was something that was created until very recently, 2 years ago. We started what like the equivalent of the chapters in Mexico. So they're called nodes. Right now we have 8 nodes in 9 different states in Mexico. And they're like the landing strip for projects that these chapters are creating, so that they can create projects at the local level, or either in their cities or wherever they were born, in their hometowns. Because as a federal government, it was sometimes difficult to give them access to state governments or to local governments and to local institutions. So the nodes are also civil society organizations, but they need to have very strong connections to the local governments, university and higher education institutions, think tanks, and whatnot. I guess it's just to echo what Mr. Fidel was talking about of the circularity of knowledge and the knowledge-based economy. As soon as we noticed that we had all this talent abroad, this is not only a way for them to contribute, but it also meant that we had people with really high skills, with interest and with influences in every corner of the world that we could take advantage of. And they were the first ambassadors of Mexico because they spoke of everything that Mexico had to offer. So the whole point of this diaspora, of this high-skilled diaspora project, is it has to be both ways. We realize that as soon as we map them, we need to know where they are, but we also need to know what their interests are, what they want to accomplish, and they needed also to know that we were here for them to help them engage with their home country. That being said, there is a big challenge. I think I mentioned it at the beginning. We have around 1 million high-skilled Mexicans living abroad, and we currently have 6,500 members at the network, so there's still a lot to do. But I hope this small presentation kind of gives you an idea of what we're doing. We have really wonderful projects going on. I think I was talking to some of you about it. We have one Mexican scientist working at the Hadron Collider in CERN in Switzerland. he created this wonderful program in which he takes professors of middle school and high school that are giving physics and math class in rural communities in Mexico, and they give them the opportunity to see the institution and the facilities at CERN for 10 days, and they go back to Mexico and talk about these experiences to our youth, and that is just one of plenty and hundreds of examples that we've come to see so far. I hope you enjoyed that.
Thank you very much. Please give another round of applause to our And now we are open for questions and comments, and I'd like to know how many people in the audience think they would like to ask a question. I'd like the room to look around. Please put your hand up. And to know that we have about half an hour to do this, and therefore this will kind of educate us on how we should move forward. So the first, I will take the first question in the front. We'll take 3 first, and then we have the panel respond, and then the other 3. Okay? Go ahead, Dr.
Thanks very much. Excellent panel. Thanks very much.
If you might identify yourself, I'm sorry, so that other people in the room will know who's here.
Okay, Keith, University of West Indies.
Not saying that he's probably the preeminent diaspora studies scholar in the region. But just I'll say it to you. Go ahead.
Okay. I will temper my comments accordingly. Fidel, I really like the presentation, so congrats on that. I've been advising a few of the higher education institutions in the region. And one of the first things I make them aware of is that the Caribbean region, the English-speaking Caribbean, but also the Spanish-speaking Caribbean, is faced with a demographic transition. Less so in the case of Guyana, but so the rest of the English-speaking Caribbean. There's a significant decline in birth rates and outward migration. And it's estimated by 2050 that the population in the English-speaking Caribbean will drop by 1 million. Yeah. So if you think we're small, now we're going to get smaller very soon. So we now have higher education institutions in the region that have declining market. So your key recommendation to boost higher education facilities in Guyana with a small population runs up against the economic challenge of how are you going to finance this. So if you're going to finance it from your oil bonanza, I can work through Anthony, so I know what it's like to be living in a petro state. You need to be careful about making that proposition. Because oil and gas, like other resources, go through booms and bust cycles. And same thing for the Botswana model. It's a resource-based export economy. Again, the resource curse problem. So you have to contextualize it with that framework. And then secondly, there's a good reason why people migrate, is that there's very little absorptive capacity in these economies. Because if you have a commodity-based economy, there's just no uptake for these skills. So unless the economy is going to be properly diversified, so if there's a link between the educational strategy and some diversification process, then I think there's something going on. But that takes a long time to happen. And I was hoping that you'd put some statistics on, and I'll end my comment here. I had a meeting with University of Guyana 10 years ago at PWI, where a startling statistic was mentioned, which stuck with me. The staff from University of Guyana asked us what share of our teaching staff at UWI had PhDs, and we said 80%. We asked what percentage of the staff at University of Guyana have PhDs? And they told us at that time 16%. That is a huge help. I don't know if that is still the case. It may have improved.
11 now.
Yeah?
It's 11 now.
It's 11%.
Less, not less patients.
All right. That's the stark reality. How do you finance that? I'm not sure how you do that. Okay. Tanya, again, excellent presentation. Why do you think there's been such a low uptake of high professionals coming to the network? I'm saying this because I'm interested, because I provide policy on this area for the government traveling, and we are proposing to do something not too dissimilar to what you've done. So we want to learn from your mistakes. The other thing I wanted to learn a little bit more about was how creative industries fit into the mix, because we also are working on creative industry, and that's one of my other areas of research. So I think I'd leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Thank you. When is your session? When are you speaking?
Assuming when people could ask me hard questions.
Yes. I was looking for
I'm in the session just before dinner, so if you ask me hard questions, dinner will be. No, tomorrow.
Tomorrow, okay. Okay, so you asked 3 questions, right?
Was it?
So the next person, yes, this is young Dr. Mars?
No.
No? Okay, well,
Mark,
tell me who you are.
Good evening, everyone. Jason Fraser from the Ministry of the Presidency. My questions are not dissimilar from the nurse, actually, because I was just about to say that brain drain is not necessarily, or migration, so to speak, is always posses with a negative connotation, right? Nothing wrong with migrating to greener pastures, very demanded, and so on and so forth. So with a limited fiscal space that we have, right, how do you compensate or create an environment? It's just a question, because I don't know, just asking how do you create an environment where, you can, might not be able to offer those high-paying salaries, but maybe compensate otherwise. I don't know whether it's, in other areas somehow. And another point is that I don't think we've lost necessarily or qualified people. It's more that we haven't tried hard enough to engage them, I believe. And from our colleague from Mexico, I was really intrigued by how you guys managed to connect all around the world, have those chapters that is coordinated. You see that they're coordinated. So that's interesting. My question is though, how is that received back in Mexico? As in, okay, is the diaspora received with open arms, or is it a push factor? Oh, you guys left. Now you want to come back and tell us how to. It's just interesting to know how it's received in Mexico. And just to say that the IOM has a couple of papers that they published of how to engage the diaspora without necessarily physically bringing them back. So maybe something that reflect on.
Okay, I think we have enough questions for this round. I think people are brimming, and I'd like to invite the panel to respond, please. Anybody on the panel can respond. There have been some directed questions, and so I expect that those panelists may also wish to respond, but anybody can respond. Would you?
I'd like to respond. Not that I wasn't asked the question, but it seems as if mine is the only paper in this conference, having looked at the program, that deals with literature, that deals with the humanities. But I was interested when listening to Fidel, he was talking about the need for knowledge, the need for, what was it you said? The need for vision. And 2 lines from the Bible came to mind. My people perish for lack of vision, and my people perish for lack of knowledge. What I'm trying to say is that the weight of our thinking is so constrained by facts and figures and science and diagrams and so on, that I think that we miss, perhaps, she said, we miss something essential. You can fund things without money. I have done this. I've gotten some very big grants, not just by building relationships. What I'm trying to say is relationships can be a source of human resource, and it's much more than money. It goes a long way because it deals with changing minds. It deals with looking at people's perspectives, and that is how you really can. I'm not saying that what you're doing is not important, but I think perhaps there is too much weight given to a scientific 2 plus 2. 2 plus 2 does not always come to 4, as we all know.
Thank you very much, Karen. I must admit that I am from an engineering end, so a lot of my weight goes into 2 plus 2. So it is important to me, but I do realize what you're saying. But for me, as I did mention before, we need an idea, we need a vision, and as you say, probably if you have the correct network, it can then, that idea and that vision can then flourish and the resources will come after. With regards to, is it Professor Nurse, Dr. Nurse, or just Mr. Nurse? Okay. Keith, what I was saying with regards to post-secondary education, it's not necessarily university level alone. I did mention Minister Hughes because I did have a conversation with her, and what I'm proposing is just raising the knowledge level of the young person that is trying to get out into the workforce or to get to university. And you will have this large group who will not necessarily want to go to university, but they wouldn't have the skills necessary to attract or to get the jobs that they would like. And that is also an area that we need to focus on, not just post-secondary at the university level, but post-secondary at, let's say, the technical level, the TVET level, and giving us, giving our young people the skills necessary in this economy. Guyana is a very strange place. I live in Perique in the country, and a lot of people, they leave school with just the basic skills to do masonry and get a day pay. You know, in the coming years, you need more than that. I've met some enterprising young individuals who have used YouTube to assist them to fix the car, because you no longer need to know how these things move to fix it. You need to know how to plug the computer in and to operate it. And you know, I met an enterprising individual that was using YouTube to enhance his skills. And if we can do that at a higher level, at a national level, to help our young people, that will go a long way, not just the university level. Not to be having a time, Mr. Fraser was talking about other compensations. One of the things that I was alluding to, maybe I wasn't direct enough, if someone wants to repatriate, if they want to come back to work, if you offer them a duty-free, which is already in place for remigrants, if you offer them a plot of land, Guyana has a lot of land, if you offer them some sort of a tax break or a concession, that will go hand in hand. People are willing to compromise. Yeah, not too much on the pay because they have the bills. The bank wouldn't compromise on your mortgage, right? But if there are other ways to incentivize migrants to return home in addition to just the basic salary.
Thank you.
Yes.
Keith, I think that your question was first about the uptake of professionals. It definitely has been slow, and I think it's one, a lack of engagement, and two, a lack of PR, as simple as that may sound. But it's the data collection and the mapping of your diaspora first is not as easy, and I am talking on behalf of a country that has around 50 consulates only in the US. But even then, I think it's been hard to once you know where they are, to be able to talk in a language that entices them to participate. And I think it's also been a lack of PR, just because, for example, I left for studying my bachelor's degree 6 years ago or 8 years ago, I don't remember, and then even my master's to another city, and I never heard of this network. And right now I come back and I'm trying to go to these universities in Mexico to talk about it, so that whenever our talents leave, they know that it is there. And I was found with a surprise that almost no one knew about it. So we're doing a very strong effort especially with higher education institutions, like any institution that gives scholarships for students to go and study tech or math or biomedicine or whatever it is, because they have access to the brilliant minds in Mexico that are going to be trained outside. And we're trying for them to give us a space to talk about this network, right? But we need to reach out. It's not only outside, but it's also in Mexico. We need to reach out to institutions in Mexico so that we find a strategy so that once they leave to study or to work or whatever it is, they know that it is there. And because everything starts from your data collection building. That's my humble.
There's
Sorry,
a question.
just one question from
Yes. So I think the question was about coordination.
How were the diaspora received?
Oh, perception, right. No, it's definitely a good perception in Mexico. If you come back home, you're definitely a hero, but if you're abroad and you're doing good abroad, and if you're working for Google or for NASA or whatever it is, you're seen as definitely as a hero, because you're the one that went abroad and still made it, and you blew it out of the park. So I think it's very different than your unskilled diaspora, because they leave for different reasons. But I wouldn't say there's a bad connotation for your diaspora in Mexico.
So initiatives that the diaspora want to implement in Mexico, they're received well. They're not like, okay, this is how do I put it? Yes, envious or.
Oh, for projects, for whenever they want to do something in Mexico.
Yes, exactly.
No, what we're seeing is that, especially with the nodes, where we're trying to build binational projects for Mexicans living abroad, and a project that wants to be built in Mexico. I think it's the other way around. They appreciate that you have skills that many few people in Mexico has, and skills that the few Mexicans have. So for what we've seen, they take this great opportunity and they try to learn whatever they can from the knowledge that we have abroad.
Okay, so thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much. So the second round, I see Professor Tennessee's hand. I see Dr. Raquel Thomas. I see this gentleman in the blue, whose name I don't know. Okay, what you tell us? So, Prax. That's an interesting name. I see your hand, sir, but I'll take that in the second round, unless it's related to this. Is your question related to this?
No.
Okay, so third round. So yours is related to this?
Yes, I wanted to refer to the historical background for the two stories that Professor Arevalo shared with us, which talked about violence and the distortion of image, the distortion of the images that we have of ourselves. And since this was supposed to be about transforming the self-image, I guess my question was, how could the type of dialogue help in this particular situation, and our experience with the diaspora being one place and us trying to have progress in terms of either reaching out to them or getting their assistance and investment.
All right, so thank you.
Yeah. Sometimes when, first of all, excellent presentation. Thank you very much. Sometimes when you listen to a presentation, it stimulates your mind. And I want to combine a bit a comment that links Professor from Nigeria with the other. One has to do with happiness and the other with incentive. There was a poll done about in which country in the world people perceive that they are very happy. Believe it or not, it was not the developed country. So that's the first thing. The first thing is that on one leg, in the host country, they have to keep this in mind. That people come to a country or want to be in a country because they're happy. So then we have to look at the indicators of happiness. Okay. And Professor is right, it's not always material. Okay, the other point is this, and I was thinking while you all were talking about Guyanese history. You know, our nation state was born out of forced labor and about labor. The Amerindians, when the Dutch came, were not suitable, according to them, for the kind of plantation labor they had, or even then it was small. And they went and brought African slaves, or there would have been no Africans there, people of African origin. And then they went and bring the indentured laborers. And in 2017, we are faced with a similar problem. The government of Guyana and everybody says that we have a big gap in terms of skilled people. But the reason is, we are saying right now, is because a lot of Guyanese might have filled that vacuum, but they have left. So are we asking the right question or looking at the right leg? This morning I said the action is in Guyana. So the question is, we cannot bring slaves anymore. We cannot bring indentured laborers anymore. And in 2050, we would have people to create a viable nation state. Correct? According to what your comment was.
Well, no, they can come from somewhere else.
Well, that's the point I'm making. But how will you get them to come?
They're coming from Guyana.
It do take, well, that, we used to call that continental shift when we did Latin American history, and poles of development. If you develop a pole of development in the Rupununi, you will naturally attract people from Venezuela and Brazil. It's like Texas, like immigration. Who goes to Europe and who goes to the United States? We see the thing of the Middle East, people moving to Europe, and Central American and people like Mexicans move to the United States, and Caribbean people. So that is correct. But what I'm saying is that you attract, we have to think more of how we can attract people in 2017. We are probably emphasizing too much, you know, about the diaspora this, the diaspora that, the diaspora the other, the diaspora this.
Slingshot crowdfunder. I really love that name.
Actually,
What's your name?
Chet Bowling.
Chet Bowling.
Well, yeah, Action Planning Committee. Just a comment as well. I think all the presentations were quite interesting, but I particularly like to commend the presentation from Mexico, from Tanya Miranda, and more than that, I want to implore on the charismatic ambassador, say thank you for if you take a copy of this presentation and deliver it to the Minister of Foreign Affairs. In the previous session, it was clear that, you know, it was clear that it was not clear what exactly is happening with our strategy. So, and you know, if you take Tanya with you, I think thank you very much. Lovely. Tanya, thanks very much.
Thank you. I am going to allow the panel to respond now and take the final round. I see your hand, Dr. Stewart. Go ahead, panel.
Okay. Shall I start? Okay.
Please pass this microphone. Oh, you want to start? Okay.
I was actually going to answer Professor Tennessee's question, so maybe.
But you can answer it.
Yeah, okay.
Wait until he comes back.
I'll wait. Then you can go ahead.
Go ahead. No, she was going to answer Paul's question, so so he's left. He's already stepped out, so you better.
Actually, I'm stalling because I don't actually know what you mean. That was the first question that was addressed to me. I think you said, how does image and imagination relate? Who's the brother? He's going up.
How does it help the dialogue that we need to create? Is that
Basically, yeah, sorry.
Go ahead.
Go on.
Yeah, out of the two stories, I heard that, violence, dislocation, and then the image, or the pure image that one had, distorted, yes.
Yeah, basically one has to re-image, go beyond the image, and believe, have the faith, have the imagination, like those people who saw the moon up in the sky and believed that they could go there and walk there. That is the type of imagination, that is the type of vision, and it is not airy-fairy or namby-pamby. It can be done, but first you have to start with that vision. So that's what I'm saying. Imagination is the fuel. You get rid of the bad negative image. You use the positive fuel of the imagination to take you to the moon, in our case to Guyana, and take it from there. Was there anything else? Well, basically both of them are saying the world is a pretty horrible place. It's very evil, that slavery, genocide is a continuous thing. So we have to believe in something good and the power of good to overcome that, which again may sound namby-pamby, but I believe it.
Thank you. Thank you.
I take that. I guess my question was, how do you formulate a policy to address that transformation?
I'll leave it to the scientists.
I'll just give you recommendations. One brief comment to, I'm not sure your name is, it's Dr. Sorry? Raquel. TVET is very important, and it's an emerging area both in the Caribbean and around the world. The importance of it, and that is why I ring praises for Minister Hughes, because she has actually taken the bull by the horns. But within the area of information technology, which also happens to be my area, that is why I'm so familiar with it. But yes, TVET is very, very important. I had a discussion a few years back with a young contractor, and we were, discussing the importance of education. And one thing that I remember I told him, I said, education is important for you guys because you need to be able to put together a proposal. And without the education, you can't put together the proposal. You might be able to do the work, but you need the pen and paper knowledge to put together the proposal and to get the contract and to get the award. Thank you everyone again for being here. Sorry.
Thank you. I want to address the question on happiness of Professor Tennessee. Because there's, as an economist, I studied the economics of happiness, and I'm not sure if you're aware of something called the Latin American effect.
The what?
Latin American effect. That might be part of it. But it just speaks about how statistically Latin American countries, ceteris paribus, so everything else equal, we are happier populations that we should be. So taking into account our situation, our economy, our job market, etc., we're happier than we should be. So it's very interesting that Mexico is also in that list, and we are a happy nation, but people still leave, right? So even if people are happy, if they cannot be provided with the means to prosper, they will leave, especially if they have access to good education elsewhere or to good opportunities elsewhere. But just to touch a little bit on something that you mentioned, that Guyana needs to provide maybe with the circumstances for people to come back or people from everywhere to come and do something here. I want to give an example that is happening in Mexico right now with everything that's happening in the United States. a lot of people that were living there as migrants, they were working in high tech, in top-notch industries, in top-notch companies in Silicon Valley and whatnot. They're being forced to think about other options, and we're seeing that many of them are going to Mexico. Because we're opening our arms, but we also need to provide them with something, right? So if they're willing to come and they're willing to give us their human capital, we as government are trying to set up the circumstances so that they can also innovate. So people are starting to talk about the Silicon Valley in Jalisco or in Zacatecas or in different states in Mexico. So now our job as government is to create the opportunities for them to through policy to be able to do something with their talent in Mexico. I just wanted to share a little bit of our experience.
Thank you very much. So our final round of questions, there's one here, and then Dr. Stewart. And four then. So 1, 2, 3. Ambassador, you want to say something? All right. So it's probably going to be 5. So the young lady in the back, please go ahead.
Thank you for the young lady. I'm going back to the first round of questions. Dr. Nurse cautioned Fidel about building capacity in tertiary level institutions because of the issue of decreasing population. And I wanted to ask whether the doctors think that it would be a sustainable model if the tertiary level institutions in the Caribbean looked at another market, which is the children of the diaspora, and planned to educate those children in our institutions. And then Paul Tennessee went in a slightly different direction in terms of the challenge of diminishing populations and suggested that the people could come from anywhere. Now that has its own issues, dynamic challenges, but it's a possibility. So my question was to Dr. Nils, did he think that this might be a sustainable model? I'm thinking it too. My name is Ernesto Grimage. I work at the Faculty of Medical Sciences at UWI in Trinidad. And the government is not able to support the faculty the way it used to. And I know that the faculty is looking at a different model to keep it sustainable by bringing students from elsewhere. And those two things kind of came together in my mind. So I'm asking Dr. Nurse about the sustainability of the one or the other model in that context.
Okay, so Dr. Nurse has become a member of the panel. So it's a social model, so we know that. There is a gentleman at the back here.
Yes.
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 Please tell us who you are.
My name is Cosford Robertson. I listened to the very interesting presentation and questions that were being asked and responses. And one thing occurred to me from an experience I've had a few years ago during the Barack Obama campaign. One of the overarching principles that guided the success of that program was the principle that the mother of all power is the power to combine around a common purpose. It seems to me as we struggle our way through finding answers to this process that we have not been able to pin down that common purpose as definitively as we should, and to establish a very clear mission. In my presentation, though my brain was running ahead of my mouth sometimes, I thought that I expressed the view that we should go for a number of the diaspora we want to bring over. We should go for a timeline when we want to do this.
we should, whilst it is an open program, we should seek after specific skills that are tagged to programs that we want to do. And so those are some of the areas. In other words, we are talking about a strategic approach towards the diaspora program. And I don't know if that will help, but I will certainly want to take it a little further if you wouldn't mind.
Absolutely. I think the question of strategy and intentionality is very much, should be very much important. So we can discuss that. Thank you very much for that contribution. I see most people in the room nodding.
Yeah. Thank you.
Anybody, Doctor? I'm here to see you. I'm going to allow you. Go ahead.
I'm Dr. Stewart, and I have a couple of questions. I really liked your presentation. You guys sat there. It came to mind when you talked about the vision, the image, and the stories of the two various persons. I was concerned now, overall, the mental health of the immigrant, having to go through that process, and how it impacts on their migration or return to whichever country they're from, and what happens after that, because the trauma that's involved in that could really create some bigger problems than we even want to address. And the second, so thank you very much for that. The question that I had is based on education. When you talked about education, tertiary education, as well as secondary education, and primary education, I was concerned of the fact of that 9 persons that leave, the 9 out of 10, and the 1% that's here, and the level of their mental capacity and the experience of their mental health. What is left for us to be able to garnish a country that needs to move forward? How do we do that? We haven't talked about addressing disability in the education system, to be able to fill those deficits that we have, to be able to get to this humongous task that we are with that 1% of persons that are here, or 1 out of 10, I'm not sure, that are here, to be able to move Guyana in a different direction. And to me, that's very concerning as a psychologist.
Thank you, ma'am.
Hi, good evening. My name is Takesha Wilson, and I just want to say I really enjoyed the presentation as well. And the question I have probably geared more so to Mr. Fidel. And the thing is that, in addressing what you were saying, the comments about that everyone may not be prepared, or not going to college may not be for them, going to college may not be for them. So I wanted to know, does Guyana have a workforce, any workforce development programs? Because I kind of heard a little bit about that. Okay, I didn't hear you on the way. But just if they do, what are they addressing and how successful have they been?
Right, I think that's a very pertinent question. I'm going to come back to this. Do you have another question?
I just want to. Oh yeah, and just more so particular because I've been here for a day and a half and I keep hearing about oil or discussions about that. But what are you doing to prepare the local workers, for that work environment? Are you going to let other people come in and take their jobs and take the, that resource or that economic, from them, or are you going to prepare them and train them to do the work?
Thank you. And final question, I think, goes to Andrea.
Good afternoon. I just wanted to share some of my personal musings because throughout the day I've been hearing about absence of vision.
Please tell us who you are before we hear
Oh, sorry. My name is Andrea Watson James, President and CEO of Roraima Consulting. We're a company based in New York. I'm part of Diaspora, graduate of the University of Guyana and the University of Guyana. So I just wanted to share my personal musings around the issue of vision. For me, the vision for Guyana, and I know that we don't have one, the minister said this morning, it says National Development Strategy, they know coherent and well thought out approach to national development. But for me, it is very simple to come up with a compelling vision, which is Guyana should be the place of choice for all Guyanese to live, grow, rear their children, engage in business, while at the same time contributing to the development of Personally, that's a very empowering vision, because what it means is that to be a place of choice for all Guyanese, you have to look at Guyanese throughout their life cycle. You have to look at their needs throughout their lives, whether it be education, health, skills, all those issues, security, all those things. So there needs to be a comprehensive approach to dealing with that. These are just some of my reasons. And I would love to see if the various ministries could cohere around some kind of simple vision like that, and at the same time come up with a series of policies. 6 months to a year. How can we improve on what exists? And then you can have medium-term policies, and of course associated with them. In one of the presentations this morning, a gentleman gave a whole framework as to how this could be accomplished. And then you can have transformative projects which will engage all the energies to really allow the country to take off, not only on the basis of our oil resources, but entirely. And linked to that, I think the comment that Cosgrove just made, in terms of identifying numbers of people in the diaspora who could contribute to that. So that is just a little airy-fairy schema, but I think that if we would come up with something like that, how can Guyanese make this the best place on earth to be? How can we be happiest in this environment and at the same time contribute to the development of this country? We've heard so much. Ever since I was 6 years old, I heard about potential. And I need a young lady as well, you know? I mean,
yes, sir.
And we need, I want to see us accomplish this before I transition. What are we doing about it? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, panel, please. Go ahead.
Just to feel with energy, you have passion. Not I want 3 square meals a day. That is not a vision, and that is what you are suggesting. You have to have something that would energize you. I want to come to Guyana because when I came here, I cried. I didn't even know why I was crying. There was something in my psyche. That is what we have to nurture to make people come back, or else they will go. And they will come back, whether they come and they will go, or whatever is their way. So a vision has to be what it is, a vision, something that will inspire you. We have to come up with that. That's what I think.
Okay, well, I apologize if you don't think that's inspiring enough.
No, it isn't. It isn't. You can say that about any country, that we should have good infrastructure and so on in England, Nigeria, Barbados, or whatever, Guyana. What is it that is special about Guyana that will make us want to be here, no matter what, no matter the temptations?
And I'm saying that because we're Guyanese, we should focus on taking care of, and I'm not talking about 3 square meters, and we should focus on energizing Guyanese to make this environment the best for them, and as well as so that they can contribute to the best development for this country. And we can determine if going to Mars, is that vision?
Yes, of course it is a vision.
We can determine that.
Because it seems an impossibility. You don't see the difference.
Maybe we can talk after.
You should.
No,
Okay, go ahead.
we should work tonight on doing it.
You need 2 weeks.
I think you asked a question about workforce training. That is something that I had discussed at the other conference we had last year, where I was suggesting
have one panel, please.
some sort of institution to bridge that gap. I alluded to it here, but there is the Guyana Technical Institute and some other agencies around that help bridge that gap. What I had mentioned in my previous paper was a concerted, collaborative effort for that, and that is why I praise Minister Hughes, because what she's attempting to do is to fill that gap, as you so noticed, is actually missing. And quickly, there was something else, but yes, we do need vision. I think someone asked you something. I'm not sure. Okay. Thank you. That's all.
No comments on my side.
No comments. Okay, so on the comment of, I don't think that the question of vision and strategy are incompatible. Because once you have a vision, you have to be able to work together to get it done. Because a lot of wonderful visions just die, but if you don't have a wonderful vision, you die too.
You're honorary paradise. You're taking off your hook.
I'm not taking off the hook, I'm not at all. I'm going back to my notes and checking to see what did the young lady asked you. She asked you about the sustainability of the model that you were suggesting. So I'm not taking off the hook at all.
Why did just a moment?
Okay. Go ahead.
It really relates to the point that you made so eloquently. When Caribbean people envision their future, it is not about themselves. There's an absence of cultural confidence, which is the point that you're making. And it's embedded in most of our institutions. So when we see how we allocate resources, it is really based on mimicry. We want to look like somebody else. So it's not premised on an understanding of who we are and what our options are relative to our capabilities. So if I take that to the question that's just been asked of me, if the University of Guyana is going to, and the higher education strategy is going to be based on doing much of what everybody else has been doing, there's not going to be any market to sustain it, one. Two, by the time we gear up those resources, the world has moved on. So for example, and it's applicable for UWI, so now every campus has a medical school. At the same time that the demand for curative medicine is in decline globally. It's starting to drop off. Why? Because curative medicine as an investment is not working out for us, because the Caribbean has the highest rates of chronic non-communicable diseases. In fact, we have an epidemic. And our countries are spending somewhere between 5 and 6% of their GDP on populations that are becoming increasingly unhealthy. Obesity, hypertension, etc. What we should be investing in is, preventative medicine. But our health education strategy hasn't been premised on that. It's been premised on getting more doctors. So if I was to say what the University of Guyana should be doing in terms of a medical school, it should be putting resources into preventative health medicine. Now, when you make that kind of argument, people look at you with very little confidence. But I'm very skeptical. They look at you and they say, but I want my son and daughter to become a doctor.
Yes.
And drive around in a golf cart and whatever. Right? That's the vision we have for ourselves. But that's not the future. The future is going to be very different from what it was 50 years ago. But we're still planning for the past because we're looking in the rearview mirror. You cannot have a vision if you're looking in the rearview mirror. You only have a vision if you're looking through the screen and looking at what's coming at you. So we already know there's more than enough data to say that curative medicine has run its course, and that preventative medicine is a new growth area. We already know that the green economy is a huge growth area. We don't need the digital economy. I could go down the list. The Diaspora economy, which is one of the things I've been arguing. And it's only because Ivor, the vice chancellor, I'm sorry to call him by his first name, I know him before he was vice chancellor, over some rum, we had a vision about this conference. Right? So, What I'm suggesting is this, Tanya didn't answer my second part of my question, which is on creative industries. So I do a lot of work on creative industries as well. And these industries are growing by leaps and bounds. And I've been championing this at University of West Indies for more than 10 years now, for us to invest in this area. And we have been moving at a snail's pace or in reverse. And so other parts of the world have surpassed us and run past us now. And it has to do with an absence of vision backed up with an absence of strategy. If you don't have no vision and if you don't have no strategy, the world is going to run past you. And if you look at the trade data for the Caribbean, in almost every key area, our share of global value added has declined by a rapid rate. We're falling out of the global economy. So the question then is, for me, how do we leverage the diaspora to change this equation? And part of it is in part what you suggested, is that you have to have a grand vision, a grand narrative that speaks to who we are, whether we are on the islands, on the continent, or in New York, Miami, Paris, or Amsterdam. And or Lagos, yes, sorry. So when Tanya showed that map of where the Mexicans are, and what, and creating chapters and nodes, creating a network, we don't have to direct the vision from some centralized location. No, it will, the more appropriate way is for it to emerge from the multiple locations. Nobody has the right answer. What you want to do is create the environment within which the vision and strategy can flourish. All you have to do is feed it, rather than try to create it. So that's the framework from which most of my work operates. When I consult with governments and so on, that's what I suggest to them. But that's a hard sell, because we want things, we want it now.
Yesterday.
Yesterday. So the idea that we should plan for this escapes us. And secondly, when we want it to be under somebody's control. It has to be under the minister's control, the prime minister's control. So we have these very outdated hierarchical structures that don't lend itself to this new arena. So those are the two stumbling blocks. I mean, I could go on ad nauseum, but I know that my
Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, I've been signaled from the door that the session has to end. Thank you so much to our wonderful panel and audience. Feel free to find them, grab them, and talk to them during dinner, lunch, anytime. Thank you all very much. I've been asked, you're welcome, that you should take one of these and fill it up. Please do, before I get into trouble. Good night.